Hey, let's make a Photoshop brush. So we're going to focus on emulating a pencil, which means we start in a sketchbook with this Mitsubishi High Uni pencil I used to be obsessed with before I discovered sharpening is kind of for chumps. But it does have a nice buttery smooth thick boy lead, so let's get started. So I like to start by making little boxes of textures in different styles, making marks in different directions, varying degrees of pencil pressure. It's pretty simple, nothing deep. We just want to get some marks on the paper so we can use it later. The next thing I do is actually draw out brush tips. This is essentially the shape of the cursor when you're drawing or painting, and it can affect the look of the brushstroke. This may seem a bit extra rather than just making random shapes in Photoshop, but I figure since we're trying to create a quote-unquote traditional media brush anyway, we may as well. It will automatically create extra texture around the edge of the brush so we don't have to try and fake it digitally later or think too much about it. Now the last step in the sketchbook is I like to make some tapered lines. These are just to drop into Photoshop for reference so that I can really fine-tune the brush later. And so from here you just need to get a nice clear-ish overhead shot of your sketch page or a piece of paper, whatever you're working with, and get it onto your computer so that we can bring it into Photoshop. On to the next step. So we're starting with the image from my sketchbook, and we're going to make a texture for the pencil now. So we're going to start with the marquee tool. So press M for marquee, or you can use the menu on the left, the rectangular marquee tool. We're going to move up to the contextual menu at the top, select fixed size. I like to use 500 by 500 here. It's a good all-rounder size for high-res sketches or paintings without being too laggy or without looking pixelated and gross. So that's a bonus. I'm going to use this texture on the right here. And what we want to do is just click our marquee tool, get our little selection here, and we're going to copy that. And then we're going to go up to new document and just use the clipboard here because it's already set to 500 for us, and paste it in. So from here, we're going to go to Image, Adjustments, Desaturate, and then we're going to go to Image again, Adjustments, and Invert. I've had better results with textures when they're inverted and heavy like this. So next we need to tell Photoshop we want this to be a pattern for our brush. So we're going to Control A to select. Make sure you do this step first or it won't do anything. Go to Edit and then Define Pattern. And then just give it a name and we're done. So now we're going to define the brush tip, which is essentially the actual brush. We're back in the sketchbook document here. We're going to use the marquee tool, press M. These brush tips are a little larger, I think, so we're going to go up to the contextual menu and select normal. So we can just click and drag and copy, and then we can resize it later. So I'm actually going to go back to the document where we defined the pattern, and I'm going to make a new layer and make sure to fill it with pure white. And then we're going to paste in our brush and size it so it fits. You want to fill the whole square. You don't want to put a tiny brush tip in a huge square. So next we're going to go to Image, Adjustments, Desaturate, and then Image, Adjustments, Levels. We're just going to turn this into a pure black and white image. So we're going to move the right part to the left to get our whites, and the left part to the right to crunch the blacks, and then we're going to press OK. And at this point, we'll use the wand tool. We'll press W and make sure your tolerance is at 100. This ensures we can pick up as many pixels as possible when we do a copy paste. So select inverse, copy, and we're going to paste this on a new layer. And we can just hide this. And now we're dealing with just our brush tip. I'm just going to turn this upright. I just feel like I want it this way for some reason. And there we go. So we're going to fill in the brush now. I wish I'd had the foresight to maybe fill these in when drawing it, but we'll do it now. So hit G for the paint bucket tool and fill it in the inside here. What you get is this funny halo around the area you filled in. I've tried to mitigate this with a lot of investigating. I wasn't able to do so. I've even got the tolerance on 100 here. Usually that would fix it, but the way that I fix this is by taking a hard round brush tool and doing it manually. So that's what we're going to do. So we're finally ready to make this a brush. Let's go to Edit. Oh, before we do that, actually, we do need to select all. Again, make sure that this is a black brush tip on a white background. Otherwise, I don't think it's going to work. It works like an alpha. Make sure you select all as well, or defining means nothing. Go to Edit, Define Preset. and give it a name. So now that we have this giant brush, let's go to a larger document where I set up the reference lines I drew earlier. This will give us some room. Let's have fun with the settings. So we're going to deal with the brush tip shape first. This is the first section in the brush settings panel. So the first setting we have is the angle, which just sort of rotates the brush tip on its center axis. The roundness will squish it flat if you go below 100%. And lastly, but most importantly, is the spacing. The Photoshop brush tool is a stamp that repeats over and over as you draw your line. We want to get rid of that gnarly repeat pattern, and the spacing will help us do that. The spacing basically reduces the space between each stamp and smooths out the line. The lower the number, the tighter the spacing. This can get laggy with certain brushes, so I like to lower it in small increments and see how low I can get away with while keeping it optimized. I'd like to address transfer next. This is going to give our brush blendability. Did I just make up a word? I don't know. For our pencil, we're going to look at the opacity jitter and the flow jitter. Now, don't worry, I'm not just sticking to the bare minimum here. I'm going to dig into a lot of other settings in future videos, more brushes to come. So basically, the opacity deals with transparency, or how much we see on the canvas. To my understanding, flow deals with the frequency at which the paint builds up on the canvas. So the harder you press, the more comes out. Now, normally you want to set both opacity and flow controls to pen pressure, but there are a few other options to explore if you want. You can immediately see that pen pressure gives the brush smooth gradients, which are great for blending when painting. But it can be good for sketching too, as we're going to find out with this pencil brush. Back in 2018, I made my first big girl brush set, and I'm attempting to remake it now. One of the things I discovered that I never paid attention to before is the minimum setting under each jitter, which can really help dial in a specific look like we're doing here. This will especially become helpful in the shape dynamics. In this case, I'm going to stick with a minimum of 25% for both opacity and jitter for now. The jitter sliders have a sort of randomizing effect on the brush that is not really desirable unless you're doing a special effect brush like snow or other kinds of particles, or maybe freckles, something like that. So we're going to leave all of those at the default of 0. Now we're getting to the good stuff, shape dynamics. The size control we want to set to pen pressure, big surprise. Once you set the size control to pen pressure, however, you wind up with these funny little sperm tails on the end of your brush stroke when you're pressing lightly. To avoid this, we can set the minimum diameter. I always start with 25 to see if that works and change it from there if I need to. The angle control is kind of a weird one. It basically changes the direction or the rotation of the cursor or the brush tip depending on what you choose from the drop down. Like I've chosen pen tilt here, and it's basically changing the direction based on the way I tilt my pen. It can be cool for sketching slanted brushes. I've tried it out, and it can be cumbersome and overcomplicated. I don't know. We'll see if we can find a use for this later. The next is the roundness. Now, the jitter here is kind of cool because it introduces some texture without going to the texture section, which is neat. I think it almost gives like an ink blot vibe, which I'd like to experiment with later, but for now I'm going to leave this off for my pencil. I honestly have no need to set roundness control or anything else, so I just leave this on default. And now for the pièce de résistance, the texture. This is what is going to make the pencil actually look like a pencil. So we're going to throw back to the beginning of the video when we made the darn thing in the first place. Let's get it in there. To do that, we want to click on the drop-down arrow beside the preview image and navigate to the pattern we defined earlier. You'll probably need to hover over the teeny tiny bad UI icons here to read the tooltips just to be sure you pick the right one. And then we get to the settings again. The first setting we're going to look at is the mode. These are basically blending modes. There's several in here, but I do find that subtract and multiply seem to make the most out of the textures and give you the best results. Your mileage may vary, so of course you gotta play around. The scale is obviously how big the texture will appear in the stroke. You'll need to slider this around to see what you like. The brightness seems to soften the edges on low numbers and then increase the roughness of the edges on the higher numbers, but again, play around. The contrast seems to be doing the same thing as brightness, but it does it within the stroke as opposed to on the edges, and it seems to sort of grow beyond the bounds of the edges when you get into the higher numbers. Again, more playing around. There is so much noodling when making a brush. Honestly, you just have to embrace it. I think we got pretty close. What do you guys think? So just some final thoughts while I demo our new pencil brush. I wanted to actually prove it's a good pencil brush. Look at them lines, baby! This is my first tutorial, and I was hoping to give a more personal, make-it-your-own approach to brush making rather than just click this, do that. Hopefully I succeeded. I'm looking forward to putting together a series of these as I redo my brush set and share my possibly way extra process of making brushes. There are more weird things that I do. We will do some deep dives into some of the less traversed settings and do some special case brushes as well. Particles and ribbons, maybe, anyone? All this to say, I'd love to hear your feedback and what you liked, what you hated. Nah, don't hate, just constructive, please. And I'll keep working on making better thingies. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!